Hi everyone, this is another video on the Leica Q, and this time I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks that I found from using the Leica Q in the wild, and things that might help your experience with the Leica Q as well. So the first thing is manual mode with exposure compensation. So Leica on the surface doesn't seem like it has that function built in, but there's a way to get to it, as one viewer pointed out. And this thing is pretty neat because on Sony cameras you can do that. You can have manual mode where you basically specify the aperture setting and then the shutter speed, which here you use a dial. So as soon as you do this, this becomes manual mode. But generally in manual mode you cannot use this dial for exposure comp, because when you use this dial, it's going to think you're trying to change the shutter speed in 1/3 increments. So that's the default setting, and I thought at first that you cannot do this, but this is a really useful thing to do, because a lot of times I do shoot in manual mode, especially indoors, and then I still want to go up the exposure comp without having to manually change the ISO setting. So what you can do is you go to menu, and under the item of function button in live view, you set it to exposure. Now this seems kind of confusing at first, because you think this is exposure comp dial. Why do you need to make the function exposure? Well, it's for this kind of situation, because once you do that, when you're in manual mode, say right now I set 1/30th of a second and f1.7, and doing this does nothing but change the shutter speed, as you can see here. Then if I press the function button, then this comes up, and now I can use this dial to do exposure comp in manual mode, which is a really nice function to have, in my opinion. The next trick is a way to reduce the ISO setting on your camera by leveraging the optical image stabilization on this lens, which works great because it allows me to shoot at 1/5 or 1/8 of a second. However, the default setting on the camera is 1/60th of a second. So I'm going to leverage the fact that I can shoot 2 to 3 stops slower and not have shake in my image to reduce the ISO accordingly. So let's say normally the setting would be 1/60th of a second, and my auto ISO setting, let's say, would be 3200, right? And that would be a pretty comfortable ceiling for ISO setting. But what I'm going to do now is actually set it to 800, which is 2 stops lower on the max ISO in the auto ISO setting. And I'm going to set the max exposure time to 1/8 of a second, which is what I'm comfortable shooting with handheld. So what that means is, as soon as the ISO hits ISO 800, it's going to start reducing the shutter speed. So we're actually lengthening the shutter speed. So now, as you see that making it darker, the shutter speed is going to decrease all the way down to 1/8 of a second, and the ISO is stuck at 800. So what this allows me is this, I guess, automated way to ensure that my ISO doesn't go necessarily high, and I can still shoot at a shutter speed that I'm comfortable with. So of course you may have to change the setting according to your preference, but for me, ISO 800, ISO 1600 at 1/8 of a second works great for still life. Of course, if you're taking pictures of people, you have to set that up a little differently. But that's a great way to reduce the ISO noise, or the high ISO noise, in the image that you take. And another trick is the way to move the focus box around. So I usually keep the camera in touch autofocus. So basically I can touch the screen, and then it'll focus and then take the picture for me. Now this is great, but it disables the use of these pads to move the focus box around. So that's actually kind of something I hope that Leica would fix in a firmware update, because it's pretty simple. But one way to reduce or reset this to the center that I found is simply to turn off and turn the camera on again. And now, as you can see, this is back in the center. It's a little hard to see on the video, but it is right in the center again. So it's kind of a workaround to this thing that I think hopefully will be fixed in a firmware update. And another way, of course, is just to disable the touch focus mode by making it let me see, 1 point. And then now you can actually directly use the button on the camera to move it around like a normal DSLR. So, but of course now the touch focusing is disabled. And the next trick is basically a way to extend the battery life of the Leica Q, which is already pretty good. I'm getting about 300 to 400 pictures a charge, but one way to extend it even further is under power savings. There's auto power off time and auto LCD off time. And this camera, unlike a lot of the other mirrorless cameras out there, is very responsive, so it wakes up from sleep very quickly. So I basically have it set at a minimum setting. So the auto LCD off is 30 seconds, and auto power off I set at 1 minute. And even when it just powers off completely, it takes about 1 second to power back on, which is not a big deal. So in this respect, you don't have to have it set at 3 minutes or 2 minutes for the LCD, because you don't need that in a shooting experience, and I think it greatly extends the battery life. The other thing that I found is a way to transfer one picture at a time using Wi-Fi, and this may sound kind of obvious, but it took me a little bit to find out. And the way you do it is under WLAN, and in here the connection type is either backup or remote control. And in backup, I still haven't figured out a way to transfer one picture at a time versus just the entire SD card content being backed up on the phone. But under remote control, you can actually browse the picture on your phone and then select which picture you want to transfer. So that works great if you just want to transfer one picture to a friend, say at a social gathering, and then that's it, instead of sending them all the pictures on your SD card. And this is not really a tip or anything, but in case you're wondering about the grip setup here, I have the thumbs up, which really helps secure the camera this way, and I also have the Leica hand grip on the other side. And if you're wondering how these work on Leica Q, please see my other video about improving the grip on the Leica Q. So that's it for the tips and tricks for now. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Press like if you did, and hopefully you also enjoyed the pictures I've shared in this video. Those were all taken by the Leica Q. And also please subscribe to stay tuned for future videos. And thank you for watching. See you next time.